Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and this is my morning musings. Sharing a cup of coffee with you. I got a really good scald on my coffee this morning. It's really, really good. I mean, this is about the third round already, so good to go. Okay. Want you to remember, by the way, coming up, Memphis, next month, October 2018, William Bell will be sponsoring a seminar there. Going to have several speakers on the dais there. Offers to be a really great conference. You don't want to miss that. So be looking for that. I'll be posting the banner on our websites very, very soon. All right? We're looking at in our continuing study of the resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15, that resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15 takes place in the new heaven, or leads to, I should say, the new heaven. The resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15 leads directly into, gives birth to the new heaven and the new earth. Well, that resurrection takes place at the day of the Lord. Well, we're looking at Isaiah chapter 66 and the promise of the coming of the Lord that brings in the new heaven and new earth. These are all absolutely, perfectly parallel concepts. And so when we are talking about, let's not forget this, when we are talking about the new heaven and the new earth, we're essentially talking about resurrection. Because there is no humongous gap between resurrection and new creation. Resurrection gives birth to new creation. Well, we're looking at Isaiah chapter 66 because Isaiah 66 is the coming of the Lord in flaming fire that brings in what? The new heaven and new earth. That means this coming of the Lord in flaming fire is the time of the resurrection. I just have to say this. It's absolutely stunning to me that I continue to hear people say, or to read people to write, when they're backed into a corner with what the Bible actually says on a given text, they'll jump up and say, well, I don't see the words AD 70 in that text. I don't see the words destruction of Jerusalem in that text. I don't see the temple in that context. This is what I call the hermeneutic of omission. We could call it the omission of hermeneutics as well. But anyway, this is an absolutely horrid, absolutely, totally irrelevant, absolutely false hermeneutic. If you've got the new heaven and new earth, guess what? It doesn't have to mention resurrection. It doesn't even have to mention the day of the Lord. If you've got the new heaven and new earth, you've got the coming of the Lord, you've got the judgment, and you've got the resurrection. That's just the way eschatology works. That's the way literature works. Well, anyway, I'll get off my soapbox on that, but that's important, folks. Okay, here in Isaiah chapter 66, in the prediction, notice what happens at the coming of the Lord. In last video, we talked about how the Lord says, I will set up an ensign among them, and those who have escaped. Those who have escaped what? The day of the Lord. See, this is exactly parallel with Isaiah chapter 65, where the Lord says, as one says of the new wine that is in the cluster, do not destroy it, because there's a blessing in it. Even so, I will not destroy them all. The Lord says, there shall be a remnant in the valley of Achor. The Lord says, I'm going to save the remnant. Well, guess what, folks? Paul taught that the salvation of the remnant was taking place in his lifetime, even through his ministry. That ought to tell us something. It is very, very powerful. Okay, so of those who have escaped, I will send to the nations. Now watch. He is destroying Jerusalem and the temple. Verses 4 and following. At the day of the Lord in flaming fire. There are survivors of that day of the Lord, and what happens? And by the way, for those who say salvation and the gathering, the so-called rapture, occurred in AD 70 and no salvation after that. No, here's the day of the Lord. Here's the destruction. And after the destruction, survivors are sent to the nations to preach to the nations. Folks, this is evangelism following the day of the Lord. Now notice how powerful this is. I'm going to send them to the nations, to Tarshish, Pul, and Lud, who draw the bow, and Tubal and Javan, to the coastlands afar off. Now, watch this. To those who have not heard my name and seen my glory, they shall declare my glory among the Gentiles. What? Number one, evangelism after the day of the Lord. Survivors of the day of the Lord go to the nations. Are they going only to Israel? No. They are going, watch the language, they shall go to the nations where the name of the Lord, where His fame nor His glory had been known. Well, I'm sorry, that can't apply to Israel scattered among the nations, because Israel scattered among the nations were in the synagogues. They were in the diaspora, just like the Jews said in John chapter 7 and verse 35, when Jesus said, I'm going away, and where I go, you cannot come. And they said, where in the world is He going to go? Is He going to go to our brethren who are scattered abroad among the Gentiles, among the nations? See, here's the diaspora, here are the nations. The nations are not the diaspora are not the nations. And here in Isaiah, the Lord is going to send the survivors of the day of the Lord to the nations who never knew the name of the Lord, who never knew the fame of the Lord, who never knew of the glory of the Lord, and share that marvelous message with them. And by the way, I don't have time to do it this morning, obviously, but you ought to do a study. Maybe one of these days I'll go a little bit further in depth. You ought to do a very special study of this terminology of those who had never known the name of the Lord, who were never called by His name. For instance, in Isaiah, this will be very, very brief, okay? In Isaiah chapter 63, in describing the destruction of Israel, their possession of the land, they cried out and they said, your holy people have possessed it only a little while. They were speaking rhetorically here, but nonetheless, our adversaries have trodden down your sanctuary. Now, the folks just talk about the destruction of Jerusalem. Okay? Now, watch this. We have become like those of old, catch the power of this, over whom you never ruled, those who were never called by your name. Folks, that's the same people as Isaiah 66. Now, you can't say that this is talking about Israel. You can't say this is talking about Judah. This is over those who had never been called by His name, never been ruled by the Lord in that special covenantal sense. And so in Isaiah chapter 66, what do we have? At the day of the Lord, in flaming fire, at the time of the resurrection, in the new creation, evangelism would take place. Evangelism, reaching out to those who had never been ruled by the Lord, over those who had never been called by His name. I'm sorry, that doesn't fit Israel in any shape, form, or fashion. It can only be evangelism of the pagans, if you wish to use that term. But do you see the power of this? This is in the new heaven and new earth. It can't be on an earth that's destroyed. And are we to believe that in the recreated, literal, physical new creation that some in the amillennial and postmillennial world, is there evangelism in that new creation? Well, if there is, a whole lot of the objections to preterism fall to the ground. Hey, look, I'm out of time. Okay, go to my website, get a copy of my book, The Elements Shall Melt with Fervent Heat. I discuss all of this in this book and a whole lot more. So go to donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, order the book, include a note that says you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll refund your shipping. Hey, thanks so much for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. And of course, we have more. We'll see you on the flip side.